Welcome back to Tip of the Spear with your Missoula County Commissioners. This week, Commissioner Slotnick is unavailable, but I'm Commissioner Juanita Vero here with Commissioner Dave Strohmeyer, and we're delighted to be joined by our Public Works Director, Shane Stack. So to get things started, Shane, give us a brief introduction of who you are, what you do, and what's attracted you to Public Works.
Okay. Well, Shane Stack, as you mentioned, I'm the Director or Chief Public Works Officer. Grew up in a small town in Montana, Whitehall, just outside of Butte. Born in Butte, and went to MSU.
That would be the university in Bozeman.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yes. Got my Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineering, and then went to work for Montana Department of Transportation for 23 years. And what attracted me to Missoula County Public Works? I think a lot of things. I think I had reached a point at working at MDT where I needed a change. And another thing that I think is important is I like the county commissioners. So at that time, I think it was Dave, Josh, and
Colarelli.
Yeah. And we would have our regular monthly meetings with the commissioners, and I appreciated your thoughts and where you guys stood on particular topics, and I felt like I probably thought similarly and could work in an environment and have a positive impact in that type of environment where I worked for people that I guess had similar beliefs. Maybe might be the best way to put it.
That is good to hear.
And it's been great. I enjoy working here. I love it. So
well, let's roll the clock back just a little bit, and so what I guess set the stage for you eventually joining us here with Missoula County is your work with Montana Department of Transportation. Maybe tell us a little bit about your role there, the kind of breadth of projects that you worked on, and well, yeah, let's leave it at that.
Gosh, I started as a designer, I worked at MDT when I was in MSU. They have a design unit there, and so I worked at the MDT design unit for, a little under a year before I started with them in a more formal official capacity as a full-time employee in Missoula.
What does that mean, being on the design unit?
So
what were you tasked with?
Yeah, so MDT has a road design unit that they partner with Montana State University, and so there was an office on campus. They took engineers that were, not quite graduated engineers yet, and gave them some real life experience. And so we would design roadways. We never did bridges, but it was mainly just roadways, intersections, things like that, sidewalks. Nothing overly complicated, but what we did start to learn is, design manual, design standards, and so that made, for me, it was an easy transition to go from a part-time employee as a student to a full-time employee at MDT here in Missoula. And in fact, when I first started, I already knew how to do most of the stuff anyway, so it was kind of plug and play, and I started designing full reconstruct projects where I think normally when we hired new folks, when I was there, you'd start off with pavement preservation type projects. They were very simple. It's more of a quantity calculation and simple contracts, where I could jump right into a pretty complex reconstruct project and develop it. So that's where I started. Ended up doing that for a year, and then managed to get into what's called the rotation program, where they take a year, and all the engineers there that are in that program get to experience a variety of engineering programs. So I would go work in bridge for a month, and then hydraulics for a month, and right-of-way. And so you get to learn how every one of those systems or programs operate. And at MDT, everything's pretty siloed, and so you get to be an expert in one field, for instance. And if you bounce around to different jobs, you obviously get to learn different aspects of project delivery. But if you don't do that, the nice thing about that rotation is you get to learn all those little details. So it is a really good program for learning how the entire process works to from the start of a project to where it's out in construction and finally finished up. So.
And your last position with MDT before joining Missoula County was based here in Missoula, and what was the scope of that position?
So as the pre-construction engineer, and so you're primarily responsible for making sure all the federal aid projects in, call it the Western Fifth, but the Western Fifth of the state of Montana is District 1, and you make sure that all those projects are essentially delivered on a certain schedule within a certain budget. And if you're unable to deliver a project or two or three, you have to have backup projects ready to go to spend that money. The federal aid system is you use it or you lose it, unfortunately, and you can't save it and use it later. And so one nice thing about that, though, Montana was always really good about delivering their projects, and other states would not, and we would always receive additional funding. We called it grab bag funding, but it's redistribution funds that other states didn't use, and so we would use it every year. So,
oh, that's great.
This is a bragging opportunity here. You're responsible for delivering how many dollars worth of projects?
I don't know. That's a hard number. We were probably just in the district. We were probably delivering maybe like $80 million of projects a year, somewhere in that neighborhood. And so you work for 23 years. It gets to be, that can be a pretty big number. I mean, you're easily in the billions involved with that at a district.
Not quite billions here with Missoula County.
No.
But,
no.
So why did you choose, I mean, after 23 years you could have retired. Why?
Yep.
Why choose
And
the
Shane
county?
is only 28 years old, by the way, so.
No, why? I think I explained that earlier. My values did not align with the values at MDT probably as nicely as they align with this group.
Okay, then maybe how is your philosophy or your approach to engineering or your values? How have they changed over your career?
It's funny. They've evolved a few times. When I first started, I again mentioned going through the rotation program, and then I came back to Missoula District and became a traffic engineer, and I had a lot more public interaction. And I remember the district administrator at the time telling me, like, you're doing such an awesome job. I keep getting all these phone calls about how wonderful of a job you're doing. I'm like, well, thank you. And over time, though, I think they do things differently. It's by the book. And if it doesn't fit that the particular recipe in the book, then we just don't do it. Or you don't do it that way. And I had a hard time with that. But I started to kind of go that route. What's funny, though, is those comments from the public of, hey, you're doing such a good job, start to go away. And and then I went back. I started, I looked at it as I was there more for the public and maybe not so the leadership of MDT. And I tried to focus more on, what does our public need rather than what does the leadership at MDT need. And that's probably, that's a hard balance, right? And I definitely pushed the envelope. You always have to make sure you're not so insubordinate that you lose your job, but there's also this I'm going to push the envelope as far as I feel comfortable.
Well, can you share a little story with us that might illustrate some envelope pushing?
Sure. I would say one of my favorite projects and one of the most frustrating projects, though, and it's a very simple project where I partnered with the Salish Kootenai College and Kicking Horse Job Corps when it was around, and MDT had, I don't know, say 20,000 yards of millings sitting in the yard at the Y. And
what's a visual for a yard?
A square yard.
Yeah. But what's everyday life?
27 basketballs.
Okay, 27 basketballs. It's like a cart. Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, they have a decent amount of millings, and what's interesting, Lake County also had some CTEP funds. Not enough to build a project, but maybe enough to do some paving.
CTEP means?
Community Transportation Enhancement Program funds, which counties and cities used to receive money just for non-motorized or decorative lighting type projects, and that transformed into transportation alternative funds in the FAST Act. So anyway, back to the story. At the time, the district administrator in the district office was like, "This is great. This is like a perfect example of partnering." But at the same time, I think there was a certain amount of hesitancy, I think, within our leadership, maybe in HQ office, related to just even constructing shared use paths. And I think you guys probably witnessed that today. I mean, the South Avenue Bridge is a perfect example of a project where they're like, "Yeah, we're not going to pay for that. That's not part of our goal." So with this, I think we had $60,000 in CTEP money, and that was not going to build a 3-mile path. But if we partnered with Kicking Horse Job Corps and SKC, where these folks were training their operators how to be operators in real life, we were able to put a set of plans together and get it staked. And those teenagers or 20-somethings were out there with heavy equipment, built the trail, and then they hired a contractor to come in and pave it, basically, and do the kind of the finish work. The challenge was that when we were ready to just start breaking ground, one of the administrators in Helena basically said, "Well, you didn't follow the process entirely perfect, so we're gonna stop you this year." And it's like, why? This is just ridiculous. Like,
yeah, that's frustrating.
And we eventually I think we overcame that. But I think that for me, that was a perfect example of that was like what I was up against. I don't get the sense that if I was working with the county commissioners in Missoula County that you guys wouldn't do that. It would be, well, yeah, we're going to figure out how to do it. There's no like, we're going to tell you why we're going to stop it. We're going to figure out how we
We're all about duct tape and baling twine here at Missoula County. We're going to somehow cobble it together.
But so I think that for me was like the perfect example of a project where it was such a little thing that could do great things, right? Like you get a community on the reservation that gets a path that doesn't have a path, right? And you educate kids on the reservation how to learn this profession. And for a low cost, a whole community gets a benefit.
No, that's a great example.
Great example, yeah. We've been talking about roads and or paths, and one of the ways that most people interact with the county is through our roads, because everyone is an engineer or road engineer when they call the county to complain about their road. What's something you want folks to know about our public works department?
Just in general, what I would tell you when I started, what I was impressed with was how focused, and I would say everybody was, at Public Works on understanding and recognizing the fact that the revenue generated to run Public Works is generated through taxes or fees to the building department. But they understand that it's not an unlimited supply of funding, and that when you do ask for additional funds, the taxpayers are paying for that, and not all of our taxpayers in Missoula County have the ability to just pay more. And I really appreciate that about them, that they do recognize that. That's probably the first thing that I recognized and would want people to understand, is that we have needs, but we also understand the impacts of trying to get more resources.
Well, speaking of needs, I have yet to ever receive a call from anyone saying, "You are maintaining my road too good. Please throttle it back a little bit, pick up the blade on the grader, and keep on rolling." It's always, why is it that I can't get a little bit more maintenance on my road, or why is my road that's now gravel not paved?
Sure.
Maybe, yeah, describe how we go about thinking through our maintenance process of roads, and specific, since we get this question so often, paving versus gravel, trade-offs there.
Yeah. I would just say that the first thing that we have to consider is budget, right? So at the end of the day, we've got a limited amount of funding to do all of the work that's necessary on our public roadways and bridges, for that matter, too. And it's not just roads, it's bridges. Just operations and the cost of having staff around, the cost of maintaining the equipment, the cost of fueling the equipment takes up, at this point it seems like, and I'm going to throw out a number, but it feels like about 90% the cost of doing business is covered in just that basic operations. And then you have a little bit of money left over to do things like paving or dust abatement or putting new gravel down, replacing culverts, repairing bridges or replacing bridges. And frankly, we don't have enough money to really replace bridges anymore. Unfortunately, we've got to rely on grants to do that now. So how do you prioritize that? The first thing we did was evaluate all of our pavements. And so now we have a score for every one of our roads that are paved as far as a pavement cracking index. So it's a number that ranks your pavement condition from 0 to 100, 100 being a really good paved road, and 1 or 0, obviously, you might as well be gravel, I guess, at that point.
And as far as pavement maintenance, and this might be a little bit counterintuitive for some folks, but isn't it the case that, maybe I've even heard it from you, that the biggest bang for our buck is making sure that our roads,
Yep.
our good pavement does not deteriorate further, rather than if a section of pavement's in just really rotten shape, maybe that's not sinking the money into that. It might be too late to do anything there.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. And so when you start talking about prioritization, you're going to look at those PCIs and say, all right, where are we hitting the sweet spot with those roadway conditions or those pavement conditions to do a chip seal, rather than if you let it go another 5 to 10 years, it's going to require pulverization and overlay, and it's going to cost 2 or 3 times as much. And so, yeah, there's that balance. But the challenge is, Dave, too, is that, for instance, we're going to chip seal 10 miles of roadway this summer, and we might do maybe a mile of pavement work with the funding we have, and we have 200 and probably 60 or 70 miles of paved roads. And so the chip seals can get us further with pavement preservation with the dollar, right? So I can get probably 3 times as many chip sealed of paved roads than I could repaving a road. And so chip seals are a really cost-effective way for us to extend that pavement life. And it sounds to me, and I wasn't here, but it sounds like chip seals hadn't been done for 10 to 15 years. So when we are doing overlays, we're trying to get them chipped within at least the first 2 or 3 years, and then they should be good. Especially these lower volume residential streets, they should be good for at least another 10 years before you, maybe up to 15 before you have to come back and chip seal them. But as long as you chip them and keep that water, and water's the biggest killer for us, and the freeze-thaw cycles, and so as long as we can keep the water out of the pavement, it lasts a heck of a lot longer. So back to the prioritization question, how do we determine? It's sad. We have way more needs than we have funding, and so we could pick 50 winners, and we only get to pick 1 or 2 every year. And that means some of those that aren't selected eventually fall into that criteria of the pavement condition deteriorates so much that eventually it has to be pulverized and re-overlaid, or just pulverized and taken back to gravel, as in some of the roads we talked about this morning.
Right.
So.
Wait, I think you mentioned a study that was done, in 2019, that's 2018, that suggested or recommended how much money we should be putting into our pavement annually. When was that?
So they collected the data 2019, and I think we received the report in 2020, and that's that pavement condition index and the analysis. So
yeah, and tell us the grim results.
Yeah, no, that's it, and that's a good question. So the city, the MPO, or the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and the county all partnered and hired a consultant to go out and evaluate all the paved roads that are basically city streets or county roads. And with that, they gave us that PCI, or that pavement cracking index. That information, then they can take that PCI and give it a treatment and say, all right, if you're a PCI 80 to 60, let's say, you probably need an overlay. But if it's 80 to 100, you can probably get away with a chip seal. There's a cost associated with each one of those treatments. And then with the amount of miles and the amount of miles that met those certain criteria, they basically can come up with a model that shows how much money you should be spending on your pavements every year. And their recommendation was somewhere in the neighborhood of like $3 to $4 million is what we should be spending on our pavements. And we were spending, and probably still are, in a good year, $600,000. and I think we're probably going to be 500,000 in 2023 is the direction we're headed right now, unless there's additional funds generated to help us out. But yeah, it's just not nearly enough, and so we're going to continue to see our pavements and our roadways. Just it doesn't matter if it's gravel or paved roads and bridges; they're going to continue to deteriorate.
So let's talk about gas tax.
Oh,
Go for it.
Well, tell us about refresh all of our memories. Peel the scab off for us, Shane.
Yeah. So, gosh, when I started, I talked to Josh, and I talked to, I think, Dave and Cola too. But I remember having the conversation with Josh about what we should do, and that was there was a state law that allowed local governments, counties, to pass a local option gas tax maxed out at 2 cents. So you could do a 1 cent local option gas tax, but we chose to move forward with a 2 cent local option gas tax. Gosh, we had a large group of folks that more in the private sector to try to help us evaluate what that would look like and if we should even put that on the ballot. And we eventually decided, or you decided as commissioners, to put it on the ballot. And what was interesting is that kind of happened right before COVID hit, but it made it on that June ballot of 2020. Yeah, made it on the ballot of 20, and it passed. And then in a pandemic, which was pretty impressive. And I think that sends a message that our public appreciates their infrastructure and wants to put some money towards it. So fast forward to the 2021 legislative session, and the legislature ended up repealing the ability for local governments to pass that local option gas tax. And Missoula was the only county that had passed it at the time. And so I think that was an easy target for a Republican legislature to take that from more of a blue county. So,
which is frustrating because it was not the three of us as commissioners who enacted this. It was a vote of the people, and the irony is that some of the very things that causes our phones to ring from our constituents about maintenance needs was on the cusp of being addressed by way of that gas tax rolling in. You mentioned COVID and how the electorate of Missoula County passed this thing during the middle of the pandemic. Well, there were also some other funding streams that came online by virtue of the pandemic, and not any of which, I mean, I don't think there's any of us that, if given the choice, would have chosen to endure a global pandemic for the sake of getting additional federal funding. But that's kind of how it worked out, is that there were some federal dollars that came available to local government, one source being the American Rescue Plan Act, and Missoula County has been the recipient of some of those funds. Maybe describe for us from your perspective in public works how you see, and some of this money has not actually fully been, it may have been allocated, but the projects are still yet to see fruition. Talk to us a little bit how you see those funds being used.
Yeah. So in relation to the Public Works Fund, so what the county received $23 million in the Treasury funds, and then $2.9 million bucket B, they call it discretionary, and then there was a competitive C bucket, and so the funding in that kind of that, call it that discretionary bucket B category, the 2.9 million, really is earmarked for water and sewer systems. And then there's that competitive funding that's run through the state, and we can apply for that funding. The $23 million of the Treasury, that has a lot of flexibility, and you as commissioners, I have no idea where the lion's share of that went, but we essentially were allocated around $4 million for our water and sewer systems out of that program. So we've applied for multiple projects for the competitive grant funding through the state. We received one, and it was a $1.9 million grant. So you combine that with the Treasury money we have, or the Treasury funding, and the kind of that discretionary pot. We have a project in Lolo to upgrade the parts of the sewer system. So there's a sewer treatment plant, and that one's going to be right around $6 million. So the sewer treatment plant, it actually needs about $15 million worth of upgrades, and we're going to do a couple million upgrades there. We're going to improve a lift station. We have one lift station in Lolo that goes to the treatment plant to manage sewer, right? And so when that goes down, that's the only lift station you have in town. That's right before.
That's a bad deal.
That's bad news. When you flush the toilet, there's a problem.
That's what I thought.
And so not only will we upgrade that, but we'll add a backup system. And so there's some needs there. And folks might ask the question, why? What kind of upgrades do you need to make at the treatment plant? Well, we have to treat the waste that comes into the system. And treat it in such a way that when we send the material out into the river, it's as clean as it can possibly be. And those are regulated. And so not only is it an ethical thing to do, but there's also a legal component that we have to meet these state laws. So there's that aspect. That's really good for the community of Lolo because that is money that they're going to save on their system, right? The taxpayers would have to be paying for those increases to cover the cost of those projects. We do have some water main improvements as well in Lolo. There's not what's called a redundant system, and so we've had a few locations where we've had water line breaks, and that basically meant we had to shut the entire system down, and that's not good for the folks that live in Lolo. And so with adding these redundancies, adding loop systems, if we do have a break, we can shut one main line off, and then you would still have some others to feed. And you may have to shut off a portion of the community, but not the entire community is what we're doing today. So we did apply for competitive grant funds for that. We weren't successful the first time, and now we've submitted a second round. We were pretty close. We were on the bubble the first time, and so I think I think we have a good chance of being funded. So there's that, and then there's a few other small improvements that we're going to be doing to the sewer and water system in Clinton that we manage and maintain, and then a water system that we maintain in the Y area. And they're smaller, like 45 users, but big improvements to a system spread out over 45 people is a big cost. So it'll be really beneficial to those folks. So that's kind of where the ARPA funding is going.
Yeah, that's super important, and glad to hear you're able to leverage what we do have to try to get additional dollars too.
Yeah, and I think we'll be lucky there. The one thing I wanted to touch on too with the gas tax, that was going to generate $550,000 for both the city and county, so it was $1.1 million. And I think there were people that questioned that number. Well, we were short, I think, 2 months because the legislature cut us off. We started in September and ended in June. We didn't make it quite a full year, but I think we generated over $400,000 in revenue, and we missed
on the county side.
Yeah. And so we missed, that entire month of August and part of September, which you think, those would be good revenue generators. And so I think we would have been close to that 550.
If folks think that was a raw deal, contact your legislators.
There's a couple other projects of the past couple years. I can never remember what BUILD stands for. Building, utilizing, infrastructure, enhancement.
To leverage development.
Leverage. That's what. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Well, in the Swipticane area. So this is west of Reserve and bounded by Broadway and the airport, that area, and the Shea-Ron project. And I don't know who Sharon and Ron were, I'm imagining. Or was it Shannon and Ron? I don't know who Shea-Ron were. But can you tell us about these two projects and kind of timeline and where we're at with them?
Yeah, so BUILD, we applied for a BUILD grant and I think it's better utilizing investments to leverage development is what BUILD stands for.
Okay.
But it's always fun to guess. But we applied for BUILD in 2019, and we applied for $23 million. And as you mentioned, it was that Subtucane area to build extensions of George Elmer between Mullan Road and Broadway, and Mary Jane Mullan Road to Broadway, where those two don't connect right now, and then the extension of Mary Jane that would connect basically Flynn to George Elmer. And so you'd have what would appear to be like a capital H that would sit between Mullan Road and Broadway, and it would offer up a few things. One, better connectivity between Broadway and Mullan. Two, it offers up the ability for development in that area for housing, which we need. The other part of that project would have been sewer and water facilities that would allow for that development. And then lastly, trails. And so we applied for $23 million. It would have been a $40 million project in its entirety. So this was a fun story. So we received a notice at like 2 in the afternoon. I can't even tell you what day it was, but you guys were out on a field trip somewhere, and the feds basically said, we need to know the answer by 7 o'clock tomorrow. We're going to offer you $13 million. Tell us if you're going to accept it and what the scope is going to be. Well, the answer is yes, we're going to accept it, but you guys all got back from your trip, and we had to go to WGM and meet in one of their conference rooms and try to figure out, all right, we have $13 million, what are we going to build, and what's going to provide the most bang for our buck and the least risk, right? So we had to cram and try to figure, and you don't know the price of everything exactly, and so it was kind of hard to take a stab at it, but I think we made a pretty good guess. And so we got back to them the next morning and said, here's what we want to build, and yeah, we'll take the 13. And so what that meant was it would just be a short segment of George Elmer would be constructed from Mullan to what would soon be England Boulevard, and then England Boulevard to Flynn, and then the 2 pieces of Mary Jane on either side of what's there today. So the connection to Broadway and the connection to Mullan, which would make a 1-through road all the way from Mullan to Broadway. So, and then underneath all of those roadways, it's the water and sewer lines. What isn't going to be built, obviously that George Elmer piece, there was a stream restoration that I forgot to mention on Grant Creek, but I think the city's going to use ARPA to build that. But there's that section on George Elmer's not going to get built. There's almost all the sidewalks and bike lanes are not going to be built. It's just going to be a basic road, and then as development occurs, the sidewalks and bike lanes will be installed. So it's going to be pretty bare bones.
And the city is going after some additional grant funding to hopefully polish that off too.
So there's a couple things. They're going for the next round of build, which is raise, and then they're also collecting impact fees to generate the revenue that
raise is a new acronym, folks.
Yep.
Yes. Every administration renames this grant program. It went from Tiger to Build to Raise.
Yep.
Hopefully next won't be lower, but we'll keep raising.
So, and it's been, delivering that project has been kind of challenging. So the difference between a federal aid project at MDT and at the county is MDT has, millions of dollars, right? So if we had a challenge on a federal aid project at MDT, we either delayed it and brought in one of those backup projects to cover that gap in funding. With this project, we don't have that luxury. We just have local dollars to try to bridge that gap if the prices come in really high. And so we went that whole year of 2020. We hired DJ&A to do the design work. We ended up doing what's called it's CMGC, construction manager, general contractor, but you basically hire a contractor that has the kind of the first rights, if you will, to build the project. But what they do is they help you develop the project, and all their pricing is open book. They have to tell you exactly how they got their pricing, and there's no secrets. And when they, as part of their proposal, they had to basically tell you what their profit's going to be. So they had the ability to get 9 or 10% profit on it regardless. So regardless of how their numbers come in, they're still going to make money, right? So it's kind of a win-win, and we get to work with them to make sure there's no pitfalls. So we have DJ&A and Q. We get this thing ready, and the spring of probably like April, May of 21, we received from Q what's known as the guaranteed maximum price, GMP, and it was like $4 million over what we had expected. So we had to step back and kind of start over, and not necessarily start over in the planning of it, but get a grant agreement with the feds, and that took a long time. In fact, we just in February we submitted that like last August, and we just received it in February, and it's just amazing how long that stuff takes. And we received a new GMP in February, and from Kiewit, and it was pretty much spot on with what the engineer's estimate was, and so we were able to accept their prices, and they were good prices, and they weren't that $4 million higher than they were the year before. So even though we had to wait a year, we're saving quite a bit of money. So, and
we're actually breaking ground this month.
They've been out doing what's called potholing. They're trying to find utilities underground, so when they do put like drainage systems, they're not damaging any utilities. So they're trying to figure out where the utilities are, make sure for sure they're out of the way, and then they plan on starting in the installation of those sumps in mid-April. So they're breaking ground. And the hard part about this whole thing is that they couldn't order anything. The feds don't allow you to order anything until you have that grant agreement and have the contract, and then you can start. it just hamstrings it. And so if it's a locally funded project, we could have been out ordering all the materials we needed, but instead you wait. You have to wait. And this is why I'm hesitant to apply for more of these things, because they come with so many risks. And if you have $10 million sitting in a coffer somewhere to say, well, here's our risk fund to overcome all of these things that can happen, we're good. But when we have to thread the needle perfectly, which what we did, and
continue to do.
Well,
there are a lot of needles to be threaded.
Ooh, but 30 seconds here on Sharon.
Yeah, so if you've been to the fishing access at Sharon,
East Missoula.
Yeah, East Missoula. Yeah, it gets really packed on Highway 200, right? So people are parking on Highway 200. This project is simply building a new parking lot along Highway 200, not too far from the existing Sharon site, where a trail will be there to connect up the two, so you can park and walk to the existing facility.
That will be huge.
It's all funded through the local county government. Highway 200 is a state facility. Sharon is a state fish wildlife parks facility, and so I give my state partners a hard time, because it's like county government's coming to help you guys with this problem, and
you're welcome, partner agencies.
But they've been really good to work with. No, MDT and FWP have been really good partners on this project, so it's going to be a win-win-win, I think.
From your experience being with Missoula County for the past few years, if you were to look at your crystal ball and project out a few years, where would you like to see Missoula County be in the next 5 years from now?
Missoula County Public Works or Missoula County in general?
Both.
Yeah, you can answer both if you want.
So ideally, Public Works. What I can tell you is that, at least on the road and bridge side, there's funding problems, and if we can overcome those funding gaps somehow, and we've really tried to be creative. So, and let me talk about that a little bit. Instead of buying new equipment, we've figured out a way to get federal used equipment that they're no longer using, right? So that costs us very little money to have it delivered and repaired, and we save a ton of money. We've started to buy just used equipment instead of brand new, and we're saving money there, but it's still not enough. And so at the end of the day, I think, we talked about the pavements. I didn't really touch that much on bridge, but I think we might have, in a good year, $50,000 left over after we have all the operations costs to actually put towards a bridge, unfortunately. And so we're a little underfunded. And so if I was going to try to change anything in 5 years, that would be it. If we don't change anything, things like CI 121 make me really nervous, because at that point, all we're going to be doing is just trying to maintain what we have. And when it comes to bridges, if bridges start to fail, I think at that point, the answer might be, in certain circumstances, that the bridge just goes away. And I think, I can think of a handful of bridges that we've talked about trying to replace that are duplicative. So, Lolo Street in the city here. And maybe I should touch on that piece too. Bridges in the city of Missoula have to be maintained, for the most part, by the county. And, the city can help fund those things, and we partner with the city, but we're responsible for the bridges in the city. There's definitely a gap in the amount of funding we have and the amount of funding that we need. And we've tried to be as creative as possible to come up with funding solutions, but the gas tax is a perfect one, where that one's removed from your toolkit. So where I'd like to see the county in 5 years is that we have some of these funding issues ironed out. But the reality is if we don't, our infrastructure is going to continue to deteriorate. And in some cases, we're going to just have to, potentially, like bridges, like I said, get rid of them. And as far as the county, I don't know. I hope, I don't know what your plans are, but I do appreciate working with all three of you. I hope you guys are around.
Well, there's a reapplication process as we're speaking going on here. So
what I would just say is that you guys have a positive attitude, and you try to find solutions to problems rather than ignoring them or just saying we don't have a solution and moving on. At least you're taking a crack at it. Whether or not we solve the problem, you're trying to find a way to solve them. So I think if we can keep that attitude, I think that's a good thing.
So on a personal here, what needs to happen to keep you working at Missoula County? You've had an opportunity to retire earlier.
No, I love it here actually. So there's this. What I would tell you, when I was working at MDT, I think I got to the point where it's like I got to retire, I got to go do something else, and I planned. I kind of planned my future in that mode, and when I got to the county, it's like, well, this is good. Now, how do I balance this plan of retirement versus staying? And to throw another issue in the mix, I've got a 17-month-old at home, and I really want to make sure that I experience raising him as much as I can. And so, I'll get another 3 years and change in for sure. And then I don't know. I can, the cool thing is the retirement people called me and said, you can retire like this fall.
So it's all up to baby Shane. That's okay. Duly noted.
No, those folks have not called me yet. So.
Okay, continuing with the personal thread here. You come across as this positive, can-do guy. What do you dread?
Podcasts?
No, not much. Really, not much. I can't. The only thing I can think of that I would dread is death. Basically, at this point, I'm pretty. Life is pretty good.
That's great to hear. Okay, well, we'll go with that. Okay, yeah, you're a pilot and a triathlete too. I forgot about this. Yeah, why'd you start flying? And what's the appeal of triathlons?
So I'd mentioned I went through the rotation process at MDT, and one of the departments I rotated through, I got to spend like 2 weeks with a guy that was a pilot, and we were out working on bridges for 2 weeks straight, and you just driving around, you get to know people. So he tells me he's a pilot, so he took me flying, and that was it. I think it's one of those things where you do it once, and you either bit by the bug or you're not. So that's kind of how it started for me. And then, it's an expensive hobby, though, and a time-consuming hobby. So
baby Shane has something to do with that, too.
And then triathlons. Oh, gosh. I had a friend that, I basically would, lift and do some 5Ks and 10Ks, and that was good enough. And there was a group of us that would regularly run. I was probably in my 20s. And if you're familiar with triathlon, Missoula used to have a really big triathlon called the Grizzly Triathlon. It was just a sprint tri. And so he, one of them just said, there was a group of like 3 or 4 of us that would train together. And he's like, hey, we should go do this triathlon thing. We should try it once. And I'll try it once. And so for a month before, we practiced swimming. And so I got to the point where I could do down and back enough times to where I could get the 1,000 yards. And I think you had to have it done in like 25 minutes. And I probably ended up, during the race, I probably finished it in 20 minutes, and it was brutal. It was like so bad. And I remember thinking to myself, if I ever do this, because I had a great time. It was fun. It was, kind of different than just going and running a 5K. And so I thought if I ever did this again, I have to learn how to swim. And it was probably 5 years later where I finally was like, all right, I made the jump to like make a commitment to it. And it's been a part of my life for the last probably 10 to 15 years. So raced like Ironman races, like full Ironman races, and those are an experience. Like, so when you ask,
one word to describe it.
Well,
I am breaking a sweat right now.
Well, when you ask me like, what do you dread? It's like those things. It's amazing how much they build character, because like you can go through like a 30-week training program where you start off just the first 10 weeks of just kind of some basic workouts, and then by the time you're in your last 10 weeks of training, Saturday is 110, 120 mile bike ride followed by a 10K run, and Sunday's a 1 hour bike ride, however long that is, by the time you've kind of tried to recover from the day before, followed by you're doing 20 to 24 miles on a run. And then during the week it's 1 or 2 workouts every day. And so I was working out 25 during that peak week, or those peak 10 weeks, it's 25, probably 26 hours. And you're running, a lot of miles. You're biking a lot of miles and swimming a lot. But it's amazing. Like, it's a time suck, but it builds character. So
okay. Thanks, Shane.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Shane.